The case of Liana Friedenbach is still remembered today as one of the most shocking crimes in recent Brazilian history, not only because of the extreme violence involved, but also due to the sequence of decisions, circumstances, and failures that led to such a brutal outcome. It all began in October 2003, when Liana, just 16 years old, and her boyfriend, Felipe Café, 19, decided to take a simple trip, something common among young people, going camping in a remote, nature-filled area in the municipality of Embu-Guaçu, in the metropolitan region of Sao Paulo. The idea was to spend a few quiet days away from routine, surrounded by trails and forest. What they didn't realize was that the area, despite appearing isolated and peaceful, had already been associated with reports of insecurity and the presence of criminals. Still, like many young people, they went ahead with their plan, unaware of the real risks involved. At first, everything seemed normal. The couple set up camp, organized their belongings, and began to enjoy the experience they were looking for: freedom, connection with nature, and time together. But that sense of peace did not last long. At a certain point, they were suddenly approached by a group of criminals who were moving through the area. Among them was Roberto Aparecido Alves Cardoso, known as Champiña, who was a minor at the time. The group confronted the couple violently, leaving them with no chance to react. From that moment on, the situation spiraled completely out of control. Felipe was quickly overpowered. Reports indicate that he tried to react or protect Liana, but he was subdued by the group and ultimately brutally murdered. This moment marks the first irreversible turning point. What may have begun as a criminal confrontation escalated into something far more serious. Liana, in turn, was taken by the criminals and held under their control. And this is where the case becomes even more disturbing. Unlike crimes that happen quickly, this situation extended over several days. She was held captive in an isolated forest area, with no possibility of escape or rescue. During that time, she suffered continuous physical and psychological abuse. The violence was not a single act, but prolonged, which deepened the shock when the details later became known. Meanwhile, outside that environment, the couple's disappearance began to raise concern. Their families, unable to reach them, alerted authorities. Search efforts were initiated, but the vast and dense forest made the process slow and uncertain. The case started to gain attention, but no one yet understood the full extent of what was happening. As the days passed, the situation reached its most tragic point. Liana was eventually murdered by the group. The nature and circumstances of the crime deeply shocked investigators and later the entire Brazilian society. When the bodies were found and the details came to light, the country reacted with outrage. This was not just another crime. It was a case marked by extreme violence, vulnerable victims, and a context that exposed broader social and security failures. The investigation progressed quickly after the discovery. Those involved were identified and captured. Among them, Champiña became the central figure, especially because of his age at the time, which sparked intense national debate about Brazil's criminal laws. From that point forward, the case was no longer just a tragic crime. It became a turning point for national discussions. Issues such as the reduction of the age of criminal responsibility, punishment for heinous crimes, and public safety policies came into focus across the country. But above all, what remains is the memory of a crime that brutally ended two young lives and left a lasting mark on society. As the investigation moved forward, the case began to unfold in even greater detail, revealing layers that made it not only a criminal tragedy, but also a complex social and legal turning point. Authorities worked to reconstruct the timeline, piece by piece, trying to understand exactly how the events had escalated so drastically in such a short period of time. After the bodies were located in the rural area of Embu-Guaçu, forensic teams and investigators intensified their efforts. Evidence collected at the scene, combined with testimonies and prior reports of suspicious activity in the region, helped identify the individuals involved. The group responsible for the crime was gradually located and apprehended. Among them, Roberto Aparecido Alves Cardoso, Champiña, quickly became the central figure in the case. His role, combined with the level of violence described in the investigation, drew massive public attention. But what made the situation even more controversial was the fact that he was a minor at the time of the crime. Under Brazilian law, individuals under 18 are not tried in the same way as adults. Instead, they are subject to measures defined by the juvenile justice system. This legal framework suddenly became the focus of national debate. Many question whether the existing laws were sufficient to deal with crimes of such severity, while others defended the importance of maintaining legal protections for minors, regardless of the crime. The case dominated headlines across Brazil. Television programs, newspapers, and public forums discussed not only the brutality of what had happened, but also the broader implications. It became a symbol, often cited in debates about criminal responsibility, justice, and public safety. At the same time, the judicial process unfolded with intense scrutiny. The adult participants faced trial and were sentenced according to the severity of their involvement. Their conviction reflected the gravity of the crime and the evidence presented. Champiña's situation, however, followed a different path. Because he was underage, he was not sentenced in the traditional sense. Instead, he was placed in a juvenile detention facility. Over time, psychological evaluations and legal assessments became central to determining what should happen after the maximum period of juvenile detention. This led to another controversial chapter in the case. Experts involved in evaluating him concluded that he posed an ongoing risk, which led to decisions that extended beyond the standard juvenile measures. His case became a rare example of how the legal system handles individuals considered dangerous but who committed crimes as minors. Beyond the courtroom, the impact on the families of Liana Friedenbach and Felipe Café was profound and lasting. Their loss resonated deeply with the public, and their story became a reference point in discussions about violence and justice in Brazil. The emotional weight of the case remained present long after the initial headlines faded. Over the years, the case has continued to be revisited in documentaries, news retrospectives, and public debates. It is often cited as one of the most emblematic crimes of its time, not only because of its brutality, but because of the way it exposed tensions within the legal system and society as a whole. It also left behind difficult questions that remain unresolved. How should justice systems respond to extreme crimes committed by minors? What balance should exist between accountability and rehabilitation? And how can society prevent situations like this from happening again? There are no simple answers. What remains clear is that this case changed the way many people in Brazil view crime, punishment, and responsibility. It forced a national conversation that extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. It challenged assumptions, exposed vulnerabilities, and left a legacy that continues to influence discussions to this day. In the end, while laws can be debated and systems can evolve, the core of the story never changes. 2 young lives were taken in a brutal and senseless way. And that reality continues to shape how the case is remembered, both as a tragedy and as a turning point in Brazil's modern history. In the years that followed, the case did not simply fade into the past. It continued to evolve, gaining new layers of meaning as time passed. What initially shocked the country as a brutal crime gradually became a long-term reference point in discussions about justice, public safety, and the limits of the legal system. One of the most persistent aspects of the case was how it remained present in public memory. Unlike many crimes that disappeared from attention after the trial's end, this one continued to resurface. Every time debates about criminal responsibility emerged in Brazil, the names of Liana Friedenbach and Felipe Café were brought back into focus. Their story became symbolic, used to illustrate the consequences of extreme violence and the challenges faced by the justice system. At the same time, the figure of Roberto Aparecido Alves Cardoso remained controversial. His case followed an unusual path compared to typical criminal proceedings. After the period defined by juvenile law, authorities faced a difficult decision: how to handle someone who had committed such a severe crime while still legally a minor, but who was later considered by experts to pose a continued threat. This led to a legal and psychological discussion that extended far beyond the original crime. Specialists evaluated behavioral patterns, risk factors, and the possibility of reintegration into society. The conclusions drawn from these evaluations influenced decisions that were, at the time, seen as exceptional. His situation became a rare example often cited in legal studies, particularly in discussions about the intersection between criminal law and mental health assessments. Meanwhile, Brazilian society itself was changing. Public awareness about violence, especially in urban and semi-rural areas, was increasing. The case highlighted how vulnerable individuals could be in isolated locations and how quickly situations could escalate without warning. It also reinforced the importance of preventive measures, both at the individual level and within broader public safety policies. Media coverage played a major role in shaping how the case was remembered. Over time, documentaries, investigative reports, and retrospective programs revisited the events, each adding new perspectives or revisiting known facts with greater depth. These retellings often focus not only on what happened, but on why it happened, exploring social conditions, systemic gaps, and behavioral factors. Another important dimension was the legal impact. Although no single law can be directly attributed to one case alone, the discussions it generated contributed to ongoing debates in Brazil regarding the age of criminal responsibility and the effectiveness of existing legal frameworks. Lawmakers, legal scholars, and the public engaged in conversations that reflected a tension between the desire for stricter accountability and the principles of juvenile protection. These debates were not simple or unanimous. On one side, there were strong emotional responses driven by the brutality of the crime, calling for harsher penalties and legal reforms. On the other, there were concerns about preserving fundamental legal principles and avoiding reactionary changes based solely on isolated, albeit extreme cases. Over time, the emotional intensity surrounding the case softened, but it never disappeared completely. Instead, it transformed into something more reflective. The focus shifted from immediate outrage to deeper analysis. Questions about prevention, education, social inequality, and the role of institutions in addressing violence before it reaches such extreme levels. For many, the case also became a reminder of how fragile situations can be. A simple decision to travel, to explore, to step outside routine turned into a sequence of events that no one could have predicted. This aspect of unpredictability added to the lasting impact, reinforcing a sense of caution and awareness in similar contexts. Despite all the analysis, debates, and legal discussions, there remains a core element that cannot be reduced to theory or policy: the human loss. The lives of two young individuals were abruptly and violently ended. Their potential, their future, and everything they could have become were taken away in a matter of days. And this is what ultimately anchors the entire story. Beyond laws, beyond debates, beyond media coverage, the case endures because of its human dimension. It is remembered not only as a crime, but as a moment that forced a society to confront uncomfortable realities about violence, justice, and responsibility. Even now, years later, it continues to serve as a reference point, not because people seek to relive the tragedy, but because it represents a turning point, a moment when questions were raised that still do not have easy answers. And perhaps that is why the case remains so present, because it is not just about what happened back then, it is about what it revealed, and what still needs to be understood.